Hello, today we'll be talking about the COVID-19 pandemic and Asian hate. The COVID-19 pandemic, which began in the early 2020s, has had far-reaching consequences globally. In the United States, the pandemic sparked an alarming rise in anti-Asian hate incidents and troubling trends that expose deeply rooted racial prejudice and systemic inequities. By explaining this issue through ethnic studies frameworks, specifically systemic racism, social justice, and implicit bias, we can better understand how historical and cultural factors contributed to this hate surge and the grassroots movements that have emerged in response. The COVID-19 pandemic intensified long-standing bias against Asian Americans, particularly those of Chinese descent. Rhetoric from public figures, including former U.S. President Donald Trump, who referred to the virus as the China virus or the Kung flu, contributed to the racial scapegoating of Asian Americans. This rhetoric perpetrates historical stereotypes, including the yellow peril myth, which has historically framed Asian communities as foreign threats. The rise of Asian hate crimes highlights the need for racial justice and equity in the U.S. The Black Lives Matter movement, alongside grassroots anti-Asian hate organizations, has framed this hate as broader issues of racial injustice, emphasizing the need for solidarity across marginalized communities. The advocacy for Asian American Pacific Islanders rights is deeply connected to the right for social justice and struggles against all forms of racial discrimination. The surge in hate crimes against Asian Americans has shown how implicit bias manifests in violence and discrimination. People of Asian descent have been blamed and targeted for the pandemic, with attacks being fueled by xenophobic beliefs and misinformation. Addressing implicit bias and fostering greater empathy through education and awareness is key to combating this growing issue. The first example from the research is from source Lee J. and Ramakrishnan, The COVID-19 Pandemic and the Anti-Asian Hate Evidence from the United States and Asian American Policy Review. This article analyzed the increase in anti-Asian hate incidents during the COVID-19 pandemic. Using the data from law enforcement agencies and hate crimes reporting systems, the authors demonstrate a sharp rise in hate crimes against Asian Americans, particularly in the areas with large Chinese American populations. The research also connects to the surge to xenophobic political rhetoric and its damaging impact on Asian American communities. From source 2, example 2, written by Chen M., Race Representation and the Pandemic, Asian American Responses to COVID-19 Hate Crimes, Social Science Research Network. This paper examines the grassroots movements that emerged in response to anti-Asian hate crimes during the COVID-19 pandemic. Chen argues that these movements, through rallies and social media activism and community organizing, have served as powerful forms of resistance, pushing back against racial scapegoating and calling greater protection for Asian American communities. In example 3, Iwimoto, Understanding the Roots of All Anti-Asian Racism, a Historical Overview Journal of Ethnic and Racial Studies. Iwimoto's work offers a historical perspective on anti-Asian racism in the United States, tracing its roots from the Chinese Exclusion Act to the Internet Internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. The paper draws connection between past policies of exclusion and scapegoating of Asian Americans during the COVID-19 crisis, highlighting the ongoing legacies of racial prejudice. From Module 1, Systemic Racism and its Historical Roots. This module will provide a foundational understanding of how historical construction of race in the U.S. is tied to the marginalization of Asian Americans, particularly during the events like the Chinese Exclusion Act and Japanese internment. This history is essential to understanding the rise of anti-Asian sentiment during COVID-19. In Module 4, Social movements, and grassroots organizing, this module will be used to explore the roles of grassroots movements, including Stop AAPI Hate and hashtag Take Down That Post, in challenging anti-Asian hate and advocating for policy changes. These movements have become crucial in the fight for racial justice and solidarity. And finally, for Module 6, Implicit Bias and Media Representation, this module will provide insight into how media representation of Asian Americans during the pandemic fueled implicit bias and hate. It will also highlight how combating these biases can be a critical part in social justice activism. Currently on the issues as of 2024, anti-Asian hate continues to be a significant issue in the U.S. Although the spike in hate crimes during the early years of the COVID-19 pandemic has somewhat leveled off, data from advocacy groups like Stop AAPI Hate shows that incidents of discrimination and violence remain high, especially in urban centers. In response to the rise in hate crimes, some state and local governments have implemented hate crimes tracking systems that provide funding for community safety programs. However, critics argue that these measures are not enough to address the root cause of anti-Asian hate. Organizations like Stop AAPI Asian Americans, Advancing Justice, and local grassroots groups continue to raise awareness, provide resources to victims of hate crimes, and advocate for the stronger anti-hate crime legislation. Additionally, Asian American communities have pushed for more educational and activities to combat racism and xenophobia. It's still an ongoing challenge. Despite these efforts, there is still a pervasive stigma to fear in many Asian American communities, with unreporting of hate incidents being a significant barrier to addressing the problem. Some of the solutions: addressing anti-Asian hate crimes requires multifaceted solutions that span policies, education, and community activism. Advocate for stronger federal and state level hate crime legislation, and provide resources for local law enforcement to better handle and report incidents of hate. Another thing, increase public education campaigns to challenge stereotypes and racism against Asian Americans, particularly focusing on the history of anti-Asian racism and the intersectionality of different racial struggles. Encouraging solidarity between Asian Americans and other marginalized communities. This can be achieved through cross-community partnerships, joint activism, and shared commitment to social justice. volunteering, donating to, and engaging in the work of organizations that fight anti-Asian hate, such as Stop AAPI Hate, Asian American Advancing Justice, or local advocacy groups are another big ways to improve the issue. The COVID-19 pandemic, in conclusion, the COVID-19 pandemic illuminated the persistent issue of anti-Asian hate in the U.S., revealing how deeply entrenched racism and xenophobia still affects American communities. By using an ethnic studies lens, this report seeks to highlight the historical causes, current state, and solutions to combat these issues. The effort of grassroots movements and increased advocacy are vital steps towards a more just and equitable society for all marginalized communities.